So I want to tell you another Jesus story today, if I may. This one's found in Mark chapter 5. If you want to turn there, please do. Story starts in verse 21. And in this story, Jesus is on his way to bring a little girl back to life. Now, before this, he was on the other side of the lake, the Sea of Galilee, and he was busy casting an army of demons out of a guy who was basically the Incredible Hulk. It's an awesome story. You should totally read it. But here Jesus is. He's come back to the other side of the lake, and the moment he touches shore, he is just instantly mobbed by a giant crowd of people. Seriously, like Jesus was a social distancing nightmare because this was his reality everywhere he went. But in this crowd is a guy named Jairus. And Jairus comes to him and falls on his knees and says, Jesus, my daughter is sick and she is on the brink of death. Can you come do anything? And Jesus immediately follows after him. And naturally, so does the giant crowd of people. And so here's Jesus. He's following Jairus, going to his house. Here's the huge crowd coming right along with him, mobbing him, pushing, shoving, jostling, jockeying for position, trying to get right to the front so they can see all the action. And in this crowd is a woman. And we don't know much about her. We don't know her name. We don't know where she's from. But we're told that she's sick. And in fact, she's been sick for 12 years. And not only has she been ill for 12 years, but her specific illness makes her ritually unclean. And so in those long 12 years of sickness, she has been unable to go to the synagogue or to participate in the community, the life around her. And Mark tells us that she has gone to the doctor. She's gone to every doctor that would see her. You can imagine she's tried every home remedy. She's had a different Amazon box on her front porch every other day, just trying whatever she can to get well, to just get beyond this thing that has defined her life for so long. But nothing has helped. And in fact, we're told that instead of getting better, things have just gotten worse. And now she's out of money. She's out of ideas. She's out of hope. But one day she hears about this itinerant rabbi, Jesus from Nazareth. Hears that he's coming to town, and she hears that he is an incredible teacher. But more than that, she hears that he is an incredible, some might even say miraculous healer. And so she could take or leave the teaching. She's been scolded by enough rabbis at this point in her life. But this might be her last shot at finding healing, at being made whole, at getting her life back. And so she finds herself in the crowd, pushing, jostling, just like everyone else, jockeying to get to the front, just to get close to Jesus. And this whole time she's thinking, if I could just touch his coat, just the edge of his coat, I know that he could heal me. And so she does. And no sooner does her fingers brush the edge of the fabric than she feels the illness leave her body. She feels herself made whole, gone from unclean and unworthy to clean, to new. But she's not the only one who knows that something's happened. Not the crowd. The crowd is oblivious, as crowds typically are. But Jesus. Mark tells us that Jesus felt power go out of him. And he began scanning the crowd, searching, asking, who touched me? And his disciples who are with him are bewildered. They're looking around at the crowd saying, Jesus, are you looking at the mob? I think a better question might be, who didn't touch you? But Jesus waves them off, and he's still looking, scanning, asking, searching for the person who sought him out. Meanwhile, this woman knows that the game is up, knows that she's been found out, and so sheepishly terrified, she throws herself at Jesus' feet. And she tells the whole thing. Tells about her sickness, tells about her uncleanness, how she was in this crowd of people, getting everyone else around her unclean, how she touched Jesus, how she found herself healed. And on her knees, sobbing, staring at Jesus' feet because she can't bear to look into his eyes. Jesus does, well, what Jesus does, but what everyone else seems to think is ridiculous. He says, "Daughter, dear one." And at that, she picks her face up and she looks and she meets his eyes full of love and mercy. And he says, "Your faith has healed you. Your faith has made you whole. Go in peace. Be free from your bondage. Be free from this disease." And that's the last we hear about the woman. But not moments later, someone comes from Jairus' house and says, "Your daughter's dead. You don't need to bother Jesus anymore." And Jesus, overhearing that, steps in and says, "Jairus, don't be afraid. Believe." And now the rest of the story goes on, and Jesus goes and he brings this little girl back to life, and it's amazing. But it's at this point in the story that I think begs the question for us. What is it in our lives that we feel is just too far gone for Jesus? What do we feel like is just, it's just too late? What is it that is beyond the pale of our own intervention? Things that we just, man, we have tried and we have tried and we have done everything that we can think of, and man, it's just, we are still broken. We are still afraid. We are still unworthy. But it's into our doubts and our fears, our spiritual darkness, our absolute too far goneness, that Jesus speaks and says, "Don't be afraid. Believe. Have peace." And as you hear this story, maybe you relate to this woman. I know I certainly do. And I have those things in my life that it's just, I'm at the end of my rope. I've tried all of the self-help and all of the quick fixes and the shortcuts and whatever I can think of, and just nothing. And I think a lot of times for us, we almost look down on this, like Jesus shouldn't be a last resort. And yet Jesus doesn't scold her. He doesn't say, "You should have come to me first before you went to the doctors." Instead, he looks at her in her absolute despair and brokenness, and he loves her. And it is her faith in him that makes him whole, that makes her whole. And so today, wherever you find yourself, I know it seems like a broken record, another story about Jesus telling people not to be afraid, but I can't help it. He had to say it to a lot of people. I think it's basic human nature that we live our lives afraid, that we live our lives avoiding the one thing that could heal us because we feel unworthy. We have to scrape and climb our own way out of our own pit and mess so we can come to Jesus and be like, "Hey, I'm good now. Can I go with you?" And Jesus is not about that life. Go to him in prayer. When I'm done with this, which I will be here in a moment, just take a moment and just go to Christ in prayer. Whether you are one of those people that feels like you don't belong in the church, who would want you there? Jesus would. Whether you're the kind of person that man, you're hiding something, you've been in the church, but you know you have this brokenness, or whether you're not yet aware quite how bad you have it. It doesn't matter. All that matters is that you will turn and in faith go to Christ. Because in him, in your faith, you will find healing and wholeness. Go to him and find peace.